Afternoon. I guess it's still morning. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for this workshop. We'd certainly had every intention of hosting this live and providing you with at least a beverage and a snack. So COVID has interfered. We can't do that. But today, actually, we're very excited to have many people from across Alberta joining us, and in fact, a few people from across Canada with us today. So that's the benefit, I guess, of virtual delivery. My name is Trevor Lewington. I'm the CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, and we've had the privilege actually of working with Energy Associates International for the last couple of years. And we've been working with them to collect our local industry and institutions with strategies and solutions to help them better manage their utility costs. So things like electricity and natural gas, and probably many of you are here today because, wow, what a ride it's been so far. Interesting commodity and markets this year so far, with many predictions of doom and gloom ahead. So timely topic for all of us. A couple of housekeeping things. This session is meant to be very interactive. So our friends from Energy Associates International will be providing you with some presentation, delivery of some sort of pre-prepared messages. But we do look forward to a discussion and answering your questions. This is meant to be a very interactive and hopefully solution-oriented sort of discussion. So please feel free to jump into the chat, drop your questions and comments in there. Certainly we'll do our best to get to all of them. And if there are, if anyone wants to raise their hand and just jump in, we're a pretty small group today. There's only about 30 of us. So feel free just to unmute and belt out a question if you have one as we're going as well. We are recording today's session. So we have had a few folks who were not able to attend live. So we will have that recording probably on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. If you're interested in a link to that, just let me know. Happy to send you a direct link. We'll also be splicing up some content to use for some very topical specific things. And so I will stop talking because I am not the reason you are all here. We'll sort of hand it over to our experts and let us get on with the really important stuff, which is the content. And so I'll ask my friend Colette Kenny to speak a little bit about what this is all about, and she can introduce the rest of the team from Energy Associates International. So Colette, over to you.
All right. Okay, so we are here today to talk about strategic energy management and looking for the, I guess, the profitable intersection between sustainability and ROI. And our speakers today are going to be Charles Champagne and Jay Manaharan. And I'll just give you a little bit of background about who Charles and Jay are. Charles has been working with large organizations, both public and private, to develop strategic energy efficiency and on-site generation projects for over 10 years with 2 Fortune 100 companies. His expertise lies in business and project development, financial analysis, contracting, and commercial aspects of these projects. Throughout his career, he has been involved in the development of over 100 million worth of energy projects, including energy performance contracts. Charles has an MBA from Arizona State University and is a lead GA. And Jay Manaharan is a professional engineer with 28 years of experience in energy utility demand and supply side management. He currently leads EAI's technical consulting practice in deregulated electricity and natural gas markets in North America. He is also involved in utility market restructuring, energy efficiency, and load side response utility programs in various Asia Pacific regions. Prior to EAI, he worked with the World Bank to help deregulate the electricity market in Australia. And then he moved back to Canada in the late 90s as we were deregulating our markets. He was working with energy producers who were competing in Alberta's deregulated wholesale and retail energy markets. Jay will be speaking today about the recent changes in the electricity and natural gas markets, as I'm sure you're all very aware about, along with their impact on mid to long-term prices. So Charles, I'll hand it over to you.
Actually, I think Jay is going to kick us off. So Jay, do you want me to just go ahead to the next slide here?
Yeah, just talk about the agenda and then I'll jump in. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Charles. You want to talk about this? All right. So can you all hear me? Because my internet's going in and out. All right, wonderful. So I know we're here to talk about energy efficiency, sustainability, and return on investment with your assets, life cycle, and all of that. But one of the things that we try to encourage our clients to do is when you're looking at energy efficiency, demand side initiatives, it's very important to understand what's happening on the supply sides, because how you use energy affects how you buy, and how you buy energy also affects how you use energy. So they're actually very interlinked. And without going into all the different things that we're talking about in the slide that you see here on the left, trading, VPPAs, price and volumetric risk management, ancillary markets, all of that. I just want to give you guys a chance to see what's coming down the pipe here. What changes are we faced in Alberta and Canada and North America with regards to electricity and natural gas? So that's really my focus in the next few slides, okay? Go ahead, Michelle. Charles, you can go to the next. Okay, all right. So this is a typical electricity bill, and the bill is split in two parts. There's a big number here, 40% in green, and the one at the bottom is 60% in blue. I like to split the bill in two parts usually. One, you have the deregulated component, and the other piece is the regulated component. So think of electricity or natural gas. The analogy I like to use is the pipe and the water that flows through the pipe. The water that flows through the pipe is the commodity, and that's always tied to a market, whether it's the spot market or the wholesale forward market. There are two different markets here. And the pipe itself is regulated. Who regulates the pipe? It's the Alberta Utilities Commission in Alberta. So I'll be talking about what's going on the top half of the bill, and I'll also be talking about what's happening in the bottom half of the bill as we go into the presentation in the ensuing slides. But a few little sound bites I want to share with you. On the electricity component in Alberta, we're faced with declining reserve margins. And that's a combination as a result of us converting from coal to natural gas. And that process has started from 5 to 6 years ago. Now, what has recently happened is when TransAlta announced that they were early retiring a few Sundance and Keephills units, that's effectively taking 8.5% of our supply off grid. Now, when we're tight in supply and our reserve margins are below 30% and declining even further, what does that mean? We're now tied to the import markets, and Alberta imports its electricity from BC and also from the US directly to the Alberta Montana tiling, Mattle, down south of Lethbridge. And when we go into BC is actually doing, interesting enough, they get to arbitrage our power with the US market. And now in Alberta, we're tied to the Bit-C market in Northwest Washington, in those markets there. So our import prices are actually driven from the US now. So interesting enough here, and I'll show you some slides later, the prices in Alberta on the spot market. When I say spot market, I like to use the analogy of going to Costco and buying gas at the pump. Whatever price you use, when you pay, you fill your gas at that time is what you pay in the spot market, right? So the prices in the spot market in Alberta has risen significantly this year. And we're faced with coal to gas conversions. That's really going to be completed, expected by 2023. And you've all heard in the news, natural gas prices right now are very volatile. I'll talk about that later. And that's also having an effect in power prices as we convert from coal to natural gas. At the bottom half, where we talk about regulated delivery charges, the pipe itself, not the water that flows through the pipe itself. One of the main issues we're going to be faced is every 20 years, Alberta goes through this big process called bulk transmission tariff proceedings, where as you drive outside of Lethbridge or Alberta, Edmonton or Calgary, you see those big transmission lines. Those lines are connected all the way right down from Alberta right to Anaheim. we're all part of the same grid. It's all interconnected. And interesting enough, bulk transmission rates, we have this thing called postage stamp rates in Alberta, where, it doesn't matter if you're 10 feet away from a power plant or 100 miles away, you pay the same transmission rate. Now, 20 years has gone by. Now the AUC is going through this process. They just started the process to look at bulk transmission tariffs, which EAI is involved in this process. Interesting enough, over time, as you know, 60% of Alberta's electrical load is industrial, and many of the large industrials are going behind the fence to generate their own power, driven by environmental reasons. They're converting their coke boilers to natural gas, and more importantly, they want to get off the grid and not use transmission as much or at all anymore. Transmission costs is a zero-sum game. As more and more large industrials get off the system, that cost is going to start trickling down to commercial and institutional and residential customers like ourselves. So what's going to happen there? I'll show you some numbers also in the ensuing slides. All right, Charles, next one, please. All right, so I have here, it's electricity slide, and I want to focus on the top half for now. You'll see the transmission and distribution charges from 2021 to 2030. If you go from where we are today to where we are in 2030, these numbers were all taken from the ISO bulk tariff proceedings from the last proceeding, not the current one. So as we go into the current proceeding, we're going to look at who wants to be in the game, who's going to leave the system. Those costs may change. So if we're just looking at current state right now, based on the current the past proceeding and where the numbers are looking right now, we're looking at least we're looking at a 23% jump by the time we hit 2030 for transmission. And what we did is we took distribution to be a function of the transmission costs. The distribution companies, they have a different hearing, a proceeding that deals with their costs, but usually it's somewhat tied to the cost of transmission also. There's a percentage of it tied to distribution. So when you look at where prices are going, where the T&D, transmission distribution costs, are moving in the next 10 years, it's quite significant. It's going to be at least 60 to 70% of your bill. So the size of the pipe, using the mechanical analogy, is going to be key. If you don't want to, if instead of running 10 light bulbs at the same time, use 5, because it's going to reduce the size of the pipe. That's the key message here. So when you're looking at electricity demand and consumption initiatives, it's very key for you guys to focus on demand charges as much as you want to reduce consumption charges too, because this is going to be a larger chunk of your bill moving forward. Now, going down in the same slide, the graph in the far left here talks about the spot prices in Alberta in the last 17, 18 years, from 2005 moving forward. The spot price is the price you pay at the pump, right? And as you know, in Alberta, electricity the system we have here is we call it a merit order dispatch, meaning the last power plant that comes online to meet demand sets the price, whether it's a coal plant, gas plant, or import. Wind does not set the price. It's just a price taker because you can't dispatch a windmill. So just looking back in since 2005, all the way where we are today, just look at where we are today in 2021. The average spot price in Alberta is $102.87. That's a pure arithmetic average. If you take that and take a typical office building in Calgary and shape it using a bell curve, because they use more power during the on-peak hours versus off-peak, you're looking at an average load-weighted spot price for the last 17 years at $64.50. That's just some numbers to keep in mind. That is an average based on a highly carbonized grid. 60 to 70% of our supply in the last 15 to 20 years was all driven by coal. That's changing. We're transitioning away from coal. So the numbers are going to change. How much it's going to change? Look at the table now to your right. So now, as we're shifting from coal to natural gas, by 2023, most of our coal plants will have been decommissioned or converted to natural gas. And with the GGPPA Act, the Greenhouse Gas Pricing Pollution Act, it's such a mouthful from Ottawa that's just been legislated. Those emissions penalties are going to start increasing from $50 a ton in 2022 at $15 a year every year right up to 2030 at $170 a ton CO2 equivalent. How is that going to affect prices in Alberta and in our grid supply? So as we move from coal to natural gas, the most efficient gas-fired plant in Alberta is a combined cycle gas-fired turbine. It's so what we have done is we've worked the ASO and we've taken their numbers, we've applied that to combined cycle gas-fired plant, and from 2024 to 2026, the levelized cost of energy coming from that plant is $62.59. That's for a strip of power running 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So now you take that cost of energy and you apply that to the forward wholesale market. The forward wholesale market, a lot of our clients who work with us understand what this wholesale forward market is. To simply put, the wholesale forward market is traded in an exchange. The price, for example, in 2025 is showing at $58.25. That power is not even produced yet, but there's value for that power in the future. And that power is traded with a whole bunch of counterparties in Alberta, power producers, banks, TD Bank, Scotiabank. The companies in the UK also trade that. They all belong to the same exchange called ICE, Intercontinental Exchange. That's the market that we are involved to. We looked at all those prices, and today, as of today, as you can see, 2022 is trading at $91.50. That is, and if you look at where the prices has been at the start of the year, it was $59.75. Market prices have gone significantly higher. It's a combination of what's happened with the TransAlta announcement, what's happening with our grid. And as you see, if you go further into the future, those prices tend to come off. And the interesting thing is, you can see, as you go beyond 2026, you're going to be adding about a $15 a ton CO2 emissions to that price. So the levelized cost of generation $62.59. As you go into the future, that cost is going to start going higher. So we're faced in Alberta with two things here right now. Transmission distribution charges are moving higher because of the bulk transmission costs, and a lot of industrials looking at leaving the grid. And the other one is because if we're transitioning to a decarbonized environment, our gas-fired plants are going to be faced with high emissions penalties. And all in all, you're looking at between $120 to $150 a megawatt hour combined utility costs as you're looking into these projects right up to 2030. So the baseline significantly changed if you're looking at energy efficiency from the last 5 years. All right. I'm just going to go to the next slide, probably the last slide here. Charles, let's talk about natural gas. So everybody's been hearing a lot of news here with natural gas prices in Europe, going higher, and some people say it's political, they're tying it to Russia and whatnot. Well, how is this all affecting North America? So what the graph at the very top is an average of the last gas spot prices in the last 20 years. So basically, if you are not hedging and you're just riding the spot market in Alberta, your load weighted average price, meaning because you're assuming using more gas in the winter and less in the summer, you'll be paying an average of $4.36 a gigajoule. That is the number you need to keep in mind, because in the last 20 years, the natural gas market in North America was a continental market. We're now in transition to become an intercontinental market. And how is that? Because 10% of our supply, our output right now is linked to Europe through LNG exports. And if that is only going to grow. So with 10% of our gas price tied to Europe, you look at how much our gas prices have moved up across North America. So I wanted to show you here in the table here that gas today is trading for 2022 at $3.82. Look, before this whole European crisis kicked in, it was trading as low as $2.22. That is a huge jump. And why? 10% of our exports are tied into that market. Our storage levels are not that bad. Let me reassure everyone here. We have enough storage for us to keep our homes heated for the winter. We do. Europe doesn't have that luxury. We do, but we're paying for that right now. So just to give you some numbers, month to date for natural gas in October, right now in Alberta is almost $5. And it's not even a winter month yet. So things are changing as you look into the future. Gas prices follows a backwardated market. It's cheaper as you go further into the future. So a lot of us, we need to start looking at strategies and how you can take advantage of the back of the curve, which is cheaper to offset the higher price in the front. So that's for another day. But just want to let you know that the North American gas grid is now starting to link itself with the European market, and we're seeing prices shift accordingly. Now, a bit of a carbon update here. I've put a table here that talks about emissions performance credits and renewable generation offsets. And one thing I want to bring to your attention is the carbon intensity values that you have here. And this is what we got from the ISO at 0.53 for renewable generation offsets. And that's really tied into displacing coal and coal mix power today. As we transition into a base load natural gas fired supply in 2023, that intensity value is going to decrease to 0.37. So accordingly, when you take the emissions penalties that is going to start to coming in effect in 2023 and above, you'll see those numbers are going to match up, because by then the offsets are going to be at 0.37, the same as the emissions performance credits. So those organizations that have the ability to get on these demand side or energy efficiency projects, that is the value that you can look at if you are reducing 5, 10, 15,000 megawatt hours of electricity equivalent. And you can take that, and Charles can talk about it later, and you can actually apply that value to your project if there's a way for you to commoditize those values going forward. All right, that's it, Charles.
Thanks, Jay. Excuse me. Thanks, Jay. Yeah, obviously times are changing. We have been spoiled by the last few years of low utility costs. Don't think we're going to see those numbers again for a very long time, if ever, frankly. But and thank you, Trevor and EDL, for hosting the presentation today. Before I get into the substance of my presentation, I just want to take a moment to lay a foundation in terms of the opportunity that we have in front of us. So Jay's already painted a picture as far as where we're going in terms of rates and the impact of the decarbonization of our grid, et cetera. But I also want to talk about the positives. I also want to outline some of the typical barriers and challenges that are kind of consistent that we see that prevent organizations from pursuing these opportunities or capturing their full potential. So the opportunity to invest in sustainability or energy efficiency has never been better, certainly not in my career in the last 10 years. all things considered. Not only are the resources abundant and economics improving daily, as Jay kind of alluded to, but the social mandate has evolved from kind of being, as I say, a mandate to more of an imperative. So organizations that are no longer considered leaders for pursuing sustainability, rather the focus is now on those that are not doing enough. Really, it's kind of expected now that you have a sustainability plan and you have some fairly aggressive goals and targets. You know, that pressure is going to continue ramping up as it becomes more difficult to access capital, as customers become more demanding, and insurance becomes harder to access if you're lagging behind in these areas. So, you know, the opportunity is there, but so is the pressure to do stuff. Relative cost of distributed generation is falling. Solar PV is now approaching parity as far as levelized cost of energy. CHP systems are becoming more and more energy efficient, and even running on biofuels with the potential to run on hydrogen in the future. So you know, the opportunity with distributed generation improving by the day. Energy efficiency has always been an excellent investment. Low risk, high return continues to be so. I mean, IRRs between 12 and 25% are pretty common in the industry. And, you know, with smart buildings coming of age now, you know, the opportunity is really exciting in that space. So innovation continues. Machine learning and things like that are making buildings very smart and very dynamic. It's also the low-hanging fruit as far as addressing GHG reductions. You know, and energy efficiency is one of the few areas where you can actually get a decent return on your investment by reducing carbon emissions. Now that's going to change as the economics change, as Jay was alluding to, but you know, to date, that's really been the case. You know, meanwhile, there are more programs and more funding available now than there has ever been. Low interest financing as well, 1 to 3% from the federal government is available, and the tax incentives. So really, you know, there's tons of money available. It can be complicated to figure out where all that money is and how to access it, but suffice to say that there are dozens of programs available today for all different types of organizations to help fund these programs. And finally, financial innovation is also picking up speed. So if you look at things like the ESA agreement, Energy Efficiency as a Service agreement, or PACE programs, we're starting to see PACE programs taking off in Alberta, and ESA programs taking off across Canada. These programs allow you to pursue sustainability projects without the need for deploying your own capital or incurring debt. So, you know, all of these things taken together, you know, there's kind of like running out of excuses, if you will, for not doing anything. As far as the barriers, though, I mean, the opportunity notwithstanding, there are still some common themes that I've certainly seen and we see that prevent organizations from pursuing these opportunities. And, you know, one of these is access to capital, a competition for limited capital. So some of the programs and incentives and grants should help with that. But certainly that's been a common theme historically. Also, limited internal expertise. So having the people internally or the resources available to kind of devote time and energy and effort into looking at these issues, these programs, and evaluating the opportunity within your organization, you know, that's not you know, that's not easy, and not a lot of organizations have dedicated people to do that. Lack of transparency over utility costs. So Jay alluded to the structure of the bills, and you know, where savings on the consumption side will generate savings, but not generate savings on the demand side. So that kind of stuff is not common knowledge, and quite frankly, even in the industry with vendors and all that, we see a relatively poor level of understanding with how all of that works. frankly. So, that lack of transparency and understanding of how that works is a problem in the market. And that also results in some of these negative outcomes that those who do pursue these projects have tended to experience. So there tends to be an over-reliance on vendors. The vendors provide the cost-benefit analysis on investments, and they are not necessarily experts on performing that, and don't necessarily have the expertise of the utility markets and the bills and that sort of thing to make accurate projections. Sometimes the savings are not realized. Again, because either the project is so small, the savings don't flow through to the utility bill, they get lost in the noise, the client gets disgruntled and doesn't do any more. Or because the vendor didn't lay out the savings accurately enough, the demand savings aren't there, things like that, or there's minimum demand agreements in place on the contracts that the client didn't know about. And again, the client gets disgruntled or turned off. And then the last one, less of an issue, but still there, is that stakeholders are not properly engaged. So the projects kind of come across as pet projects. They're not really tied to the mission of the organization. There's not broad-based support within the organization for the investment. So they kind of tend to be off the side of someone's desk and don't get a lot of attention. So those are some of the barriers. So, as we look at how to analyze the opportunity and really how to capitalize on all of these opportunities, understanding these factors that play into these decisions can be daunting. There are numerous things to consider. And to be fair, most people, don't have the time and energy to don't even try. Add to that sometimes competing priorities, such as, efficiency versus sustainability versus resilience. These are not necessarily the same things, although sometimes they get lumped in together. A solar project, for example, is not an efficiency project. But it is sustainable and it might contribute to resilience depending on how it's done. A CHP project is resilient and efficient, but does it contribute to sustainability? It might, to a certain extent, but there might be better options if that's a priority. So, my dad would always tell me, keep it simple, stupid. But it's not always easy to keep it simple when you start asking some basic fundamental questions, right? Like, what is your priority? Is it return on investment or is it GHG reductions? Is it finding the optimum intersection of those two? Should we invest in sustainability at the expense of our infrastructure? What is the lowest risk option, right? Which funding programs or market solutions are a good fit for us specifically? And where do we start to figure all this stuff out? So we can't always make things simple, but certainly we can work through the questions in a systematic way and feel confident that when we do make a decision, we've at least evaluated the alternatives and can feel comfortable in that decision. So, information overload and competing priorities can be overwhelming, and they are for sure, but we can work through it. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to share some fundamental concepts, tools, and techniques that you should be adopting in your next project. They're not necessary for every project, but every project should, could benefit from some of these. When you look, you can look at it as a process, you can look at it as a framework or a set of best practices. It doesn't matter. It's all of those things. But what I want to be clear about too is this is not a technical presentation. So I'm not an engineer. I leave the hard work to them. My presentation is more about developing a successful strategic project or program by adopting professional standards of decision-making, financial analysis, and risk management. If you find, that the material here that we're going to talk about is sort of like a mile wide and an inch deep, well, that's kind of by design. Some of the topics could warrant a workshop on their own. And, if you have a strong interest in one particular area, please feel free to ask questions or follow up afterwards and we can chat directly. We'd be happy to do that. I'll pause periodically as we go through to address any burning questions, but I'm also hoping we can leave some time at the end for more Q&A. So So the framework is fairly simple, right? It's figure out where you are, figure out where you want to go, evaluate different ways of getting there, decide on your preferred route, plan your route in detail, and anticipate delays or diversions. So, it's a bit funny. My family teased me that if I wasn't in this line of work, I'd be an amazing bus driver, because apparently I have an uncanny ability to plan ahead, anticipate delays, and always arrive on time to the minute. I don't know how I do it, but I do it. And my 15-year-old daughter thinks it's amazing. So if this doesn't work out, there's always that. Always got a plan B. But it's a fairly simple process, and we're going to dive into each one of these, some to a greater extent than others. But as far as assessing the situation, it just means exactly what it says. It's understand your baseline from where you intend to make changes. So it starts with simple benchmarking. So a benchmarking exercise ranks and compares portfolios and individual buildings against themselves and against peers to highlight best and worst performers, and is a good way to identify candidates for a deeper dive. Portfolio manager there at the bottom is a very common, easy to use, free tool that you can use to perform this exercise. It takes a little bit of time. There's a little bit of data gathering to do, but it's not particularly difficult to do energy performance benchmarking of your facilities. The next step, and if you have a single property, you can still benchmark it against your peers, but you may just want to go straight to a facility energy audit. And while there are different audits and levels of audits, at a minimum, the audit should identify standard energy conservation measures, what we might call low-hanging fruit, and recommend more capital-intensive improvements for further investigation. That should be the minimum standard for an energy audit. It's a relatively low-cost way to get a good snapshot of the potential within your facilities. And ASHRAE is the standard for these energy audits in the market. They have 3 levels of detail and effort. ASHRAE level 2 is really the recommended kind of starting point. ASHRAE level 1 isn't much more than a benchmarking exercise anyway, but I recommend following this standard and ensuring that whoever is doing this work on your behalf, they're registered PNG or certified energy manager, so you can get the best quality from that audit. And then finally, it's critical that you perform a utility contract review or due diligence on the terms and conditions of your existing utility contracts. So, I already mentioned the fact that there are many in the industry, in the market, that don't really understand the interplay between the commodity and the demand side of the bill. But there's also things called minimum demand agreements that exist in the market, that exist out there, that basically state that if you reduce your demand below a certain level, you're not going to get any savings. So you've assigned on to a minimum demand level. And most customers don't even know that they have those in place. And the average energy auditor is not going to be able to find that out for you. You need an expert who can look into those things, access the files from the utility, and find that, because otherwise it could torpedo your project. So now we have a basic understanding of how we're performing, how our facilities are performing from an energy perspective, what's our potential for improvement, and what our contracts will allow, or what potential landmines need to be diffused, if you will. We can start the process of setting goals and targets. So goal setting is a critical step in developing a successful sustainability project, or any project for that matter. In any organization, there are going to be competing priorities, multiple stakeholders that will be impacted by investments in energy infrastructure. To the extent your project can appeal to a wider audience and align to the strategic goals of the organization, your project will be more successful and more transformational, and won't be a nice little pet project off the side of someone's desk. So it starts with engaging the key stakeholders. So this will be a cross-section of the organization. You want enough to get a feel for, the different parts of the organization, but not so many people that it becomes unwieldy and, an exercise and decision by, committee. What you want to do is understand, gather input from people, what's important to them, what are their priorities, are there any lessons learned from past projects that need to be incorporated into this, and also to establish executive support and have a clear decision-making process that this is you're going to follow moving forward. So engage those key stakeholders. So for example, if you're a school district, you'll want to have the finance person there, you want to have the facilities person there, but you might also want somebody who represents the interests of students and teachers in the room as well. Then you want to look at the strategic plans of the organization. So this might be a municipal sustainability plan if you're obviously a municipality, a comprehensive institutional plan if you're a university, or simply an asset management plan if you're another type of organization. So many of those plans will have inbuilt to them strategic priorities that energy or sustainability may impact. There may be explicit sustainability goals and targets in those, but if there are not, then there'll be other priorities and goals of the organization that perhaps sustainability can support or impact. So, for example, I used the example of schools already. Can an investment in sustainability impact students, teachers? Can it improve the classrooms? Will an energy efficiency retrofit, for example, benefit patients in a hospital? Will it improve, comfort or patient outcomes? It's just this extra lens that you can apply to projects to broaden the appeal and the benefits. If you're in commercial real estate, how is a sustainability project can attract higher paying tenants or improve tenant retention, things like that. So, it's important to just take that step back and take that broader view and think about how you can ensure that your project aligns to those priorities. So then you want to select metrics to evaluate benefits that are aligned to your goals and priorities. So if your priority to generate maximum ROI, that's really simple. If your priority is to reduce GHG reductions per dollar invested, that's fairly simple. Reduce deferred maintenance, improve classroom condition, engage students. Those are all a bit more fuzzy, but there's still ways to capture that and measure it. But it's important to select a combination of both quantitative and qualitative goals, because this will ensure your analysis is not solely reliant on opinions and subjective criteria, but that is tempered by data. But you still need to leave room for judgment and experience, for sure. So I'm going to stop here just quickly. Colette, do we have any burning questions that I can address here before we kind of get into more nitty gritty?
At the moment, no, but I'm willing to just maybe pause for a couple of seconds and see if anybody wants to unmute themselves. If not, we'll keep going. But yeah, it would be great to hear if anybody does have questions, just so we can make it more dynamic.
Okay.
If not, go ahead.
Okay, so let me just go back, sorry. So now we have a decent handle on our current situation. We understand our organizational priorities and our goals for the program, and we can start looking at high-level strategic options that might be a fit for helping us achieve those goals. So, this next step is important, because before we rush into technical solutions and hiring engineers or vendors and all of that, it's important to understand what options we have to achieve our goals, because you have options, and those options involve different steps and choices. So, for example, if our goal is to simply reduce our carbon footprint for the lowest investment possible and risk possible, then a PPA or a virtual PPA might be the best option for us. But understand that that option will provide little ancillary benefit to the organization, and will involve an increase in operational expenses to the organization. So it's a really quick and easy way to do things. that's pretty much where it stops. On the other hand, if you see an opportunity to reduce your cost through efficiency, generate a decent ROI from the audits that were done, while also improving sustainability, you might focus more on demand side solutions like energy efficiency. So for a lot of organizations, they'll be looking for that kind of combination of the two, the optimal intersection of the two. And you need to model different scenarios, decide which way to go or what that optimal balance looks like. So for example, you might leverage the ROI from an energy efficiency project to subsidize procuring the balance of power or a portion of it from a VPPA. Or PPA to achieve a budget neutral solution. So you're not saving money at the end of the day, but you're achieving your carbon reduction goals, budget neutral. Just one scenario. But now is also the time to start scanning the market for innovative models that might be attractive to the organization. So models like an ESA, energy as a service, an energy performance contract, or PACE, property assessed clean energy, if it's available in your area, these might be attractive options, or PPAs, as I mentioned, on the supply side. So understanding the pros and cons of these different models early on can inform next steps. So, for example, if you're focused on a deep retrofit, a large energy efficiency project, you don't want to invest your own capital, you're worried about risk, you might choose an energy performance contract. And the reason why it's important to figure that out now is because if you do that, you're not going to go ahead and hire an engineer to do all of this work. That's what the energy performance contractor is there to do. So you don't want to duplicate efforts. Likewise, understanding the types of financial support that is available will also play into this decision, obviously. So it's important to understand the requirements, the trade-offs of those different programs as you're evaluating your options. So, we've engaged key stakeholders, we've established goals and objectives aligned to our strategy, we've scanned the market for potential options available to us. Now we have to synthesize all this information and conduct some analysis. So these are complex decisions with multiple priorities, sometimes competing with one another. The objective here is to design a model that allows us to process the criteria and assign weightings based on their relative importance to the organization. So all too often, in my experience, this important step is bypassed in favor of seat of the pants decision making, or a simplistic financial criteria like simple payback, simply because the organization doesn't kind of know where to begin or is doesn't want to invest too much time. But these are large projects, long-term projects, multi-million-dollar projects. So I'm a proponent of leveraging analytical decision tools and processes for these types of exercises. And while there are many different models and techniques to choose from, and they each have their own time and place, what is important is that the process is transparent and auditable. So I'm not going to go into great detail on these because if you're not asleep already, and I've been accused of droning on many times, if you're not asleep already, you likely would soon be if I got into this stuff in the details. So let me just talk about a couple of them briefly. So MCDM, and specifically here, analytical hierarchy process, this is a method for ranking criteria based on input from stakeholders and or data if it's available, and then ranking strategic options according to that criteria. So it's a multi-step process that can be used to, as I said, select the criteria and then rank options. It's a complicated algorithm, but it can also weed out randomness of answers. So if people are just throwing numbers in there, it'll weed that out. A weighted decision matrix is similar to this, much easier to do. It's not as good at determining relative values, but it's easy to develop and can anybody with intermediate level Excel skills can develop a weighted decision matrix. Decision trees are also really helpful if you're evaluating mutually exclusive options or pathways, and you want to consider different options. It's different from the MCDM in that it looks at scenarios based on a single criteria, but it's useful for evaluating risk. And, you know, finally, since most organizations don't have a data analyst, you know, on staff that's practiced in these tools, it's nice to know that there are software and service providers out there that can do this on your behalf for relatively minimal cost. You know, the point here is that there are tools available. You take advantage of those tools to help you process the information and guide you to better decision making. That's really the point, because you know, I can show you an example from my earlier life where this wasn't done, and a simple little thing turned into a big headache. So a school district was implementing a district-wide energy efficiency project several years ago. Working with the vendor, they and the director of facilities worked together to analyze a whole bunch of ECMs, energy conservation measures. They prepared this list of measures, presented it to the CFO. The CFO evaluated the range of measures, selected and deselected different measures on the basis of simple payback alone. No other considerations were given for the benefits of this project. One measure that was deselected was a redesign of the lighting system and the use of lighting controls, because the payback was fairly, you know, was a bit longer than the other option, a simple lighting retrofit, T12 to LED. So during implementation, the teachers found out that the lighting was being installed, and this lighting had a 7 to 10 year life cycle, right? So it's already being installed, they're committed, but that lighting controls had been rejected because of an extra 2 or 3 year payback or something. This, despite the fact that they had been pushing for years and complaining about the lack of task lighting in their classrooms. So they couldn't turn lights on and off the way they wanted them to, depending on the tasks they were performing in the classrooms. And they'd been asking for this for years. Now they in the school were stuck with a short-sighted investment that missed an opportunity to improve the quality of the learning environment, and the tension between administration and teachers was just exacerbated, all for the sake of maybe 2 or 3 years of simple payback on the project. So when you take a narrow, short-sighted view and you oversimplify the analysis, those kinds of things can happen. So I won't spend too much time on this slide. I've already hammered home earlier, you know, that there are more programs, options, and funding today than I can recall seeing in my career. So whether it's grant or incentive funding, more than 2 dozen available here in Alberta from municipal and federal, you know, or whether it's carbon credits, as Jay talked about, monetizing your carbon emissions reductions, or third-party vendor financing, like energy performance contracts or ESAs, things like that. When you take all this into consideration, and the rising rates Jay's already talked about, you know, now's the time to be looking at this stuff. I would even go so far as to say, and I'll go out on a limb here, I hope if there's any CFOs on the call, I don't mean any certainly offense or put you on the spot, but I would go so far as to say that if you're a CFO, it is your fiduciary responsibility to be exploring these things and figuring out how you can access these programs, reduce the risk of increasing costs, as Jay's already mentioned, and generate attractive, low-risk returns on your capital, all while frankly contributing to a sustainability of the firm, which should be an important priority anyway. So, you know, the money's out there. Any questions yet, Colette? Nothing, huh? Everybody's asleep. Okay, that's not the first time. So we've set some goals, processed our information and data, and ranked our options. So now we move on towards implementation. And since this presentation is more focused on the financial and the strategy side, we're not going to be discussing technical fundamentals, such as, you know, investment grade audits or engineering, you know, ASHRAE standards, all that stuff. These practices are well understood and are being delivered to the market by very capable, competent service providers. So we're more focused on the aspects of project development that we feel could be done better. And so we've talked about some of those. Let's talk about building a better business case. So also, I want to say before we go forward, if say your top ranked choice was to pursue a PPA, then there's not much more to discuss from here out. Some of this will apply, but would be happy to have discussion with you on that separately. But right now we're more focused on the capital investments and how to develop a compelling business case for those. So when you're developing a compelling business case, you've got to select, well, let's just say there's 4 aspects, and of course there's 100 really, but we want to talk about these 4. And really, when you think about it, this entire presentation is about developing a compelling business case at the end of the day. It's about using more rigor and professionalism in the analysis of these types of investments, and taking a broader view of the benefits, more so than we typically see. So these are the 4 that we want to zero in on. One is using appropriate financial metrics. So there are different measures for different purposes, but too often, in my opinion, large multi-million-dollar long-term investments are being evaluated and decided upon by simple payback. And anybody who knows me knows I hate simple payback. It's an excuse for thinking, but it's easy to calculate, and that's why people use it. You can do it on the back of a napkin, but it's not a serious financial analysis tool. So we'll talk about better options next. That leads into life cycle cost analysis, or total cost of ownership. So life cycle cost analysis is the preferred method for capital intensive projects, whether it's a new construction project like a P3 hospital or a major capital intensive retrofit. LCCA looks at all of the associated costs and savings of an investment over its life cycle. And by doing this, you can not only get a more complete picture of the investment, but you can also quantify what the return on investment is, or that is going to generate for you in today's dollars. So I like to call it excess capital. What the money is available, that investment is going to return to the organization. So LCCA is not necessary for every project, and certainly not for simple low-hanging fruit type projects. However, I hope this presentation encourages you to look beyond low-hanging fruit next time you embark on a project. Thirdly, and integrate with asset management plans and capital plans. I talked about this earlier in the goal setting piece, but it becomes more important now. So you need to identify opportunity for capital cost avoidance in your project. So in other words, opportunities where your project is going to impact existing asset management plans, budgets, capital plans, that sort of a thing. So that may sound simple, but it doesn't happen as often as you might think. So, for example, if you're proposing a redesign of the HVAC system, moving to heat pumps or what have you, and there is a budget in the asset management plan for a new boiler in 3 years, that needs to be taken into consideration with your project. So that, if you can eliminate that, that's a capital cost avoidance to the organization. We'll dive into that a bit more. Finally, accelerated capital cost allowance, Canadian renewable and conservation expense. These are federal tax schemes that benefit investments in energy efficiency and renewable energy. So they're not necessarily material to the LCCA, but they're good to know about, and you should certainly bring them to the attention of your CFO if you're pursuing a project. So let's talk about financial metrics. So these are the most common metrics that we see to evaluate capital investments, particularly energy sustainability type capital investments. And the 2 bolded metrics, savings to investment ratio, or SIR, and net present value, are certainly my preferred metrics, but I think they're the standard. SIR is easy to calculate, useful for comparing similar projects or technologies, but paints a more complete picture to simple payback because it looks at the total life cycle costs and savings of the investment. NPV, on the other hand, is best for complex integrated projects. It's powerful because it represents the value of the total investment in today's dollars, taking into account all the cash flows, inflation, cost of capital, etc. And what I think is really interesting, or what I like about NPV, and I alluded to it earlier, is that NPV is expressed as a dollar value. So as long as the NPV is above 0, the project is in theory a good investment. And what that means is that every dollar above 0 is essentially excess capital or free capital that the organization has to reinvest into other things, because that's a return above and beyond the cost of the project. So, you know, it's a powerful tool to get a good picture of what the benefit financially is to the organization. IRR is also a very common metric used in business and finance. And we do see it as well quite a bit. It represents the rate of return for an investment above the organization's hurdle rate. So that's also an option as well. So let's take a look at a very simple example, and apologies to anybody who, you know, knows about this stuff. This is very simplified and very simplistic, but, you know, it'll paint the picture, I think. So we have a project. The project costs $1 million and saves $150,000 a year. The project has a simple payback of approximately 6.5 years. So is this project alternative? Is this a project attractive? Well, in many cases, that's about as far as the analysis goes for a lot of projects. So I guess before you make a decision, you need to ask some questions, right? What is the life cycle of the equipment? What are the operational costs attributed to this project? Are there increasing operational costs, or are there operational savings attributed to this project? What about financing costs? Are we borrowing, you know, for this project? And are there alternatives? Have we looked at alternatives to this project? So a lot of times when we're talking about simple energy efficiency projects, sustainability projects, these questions don't get asked. The simple payback is, it's an acceptable simple payback, go ahead and don't think about it anymore. So let's look at another example. Here we have our same option one, our same project, $1 million, $150,000 in utility savings. And now we've got another project that we're considering against it. It's more expensive, it's 20% more expensive, and it saves less money. Why the hell would we do this, right? And most organizations, if they're not doing a detailed analysis, would just throw this project away and say, we'll go with option one, right? So option one has a lower simple payback. Very simple decision up to this point. But hang on, option two is going to last 50% longer than option one. Okay, well, maybe there's more to consider here. Option one is actually going to cost the organization more money in operational costs. So it has a higher requirement for maintenance than what we're currently paying. So there's actually an incremental cost for going with this technology. Whereas option two is actually going to save the organization $10,000 every year in maintenance costs. So what does that look like as far as a net present value? Well, they're both positive. They're both decent projects, right? But option two is returning almost $300,000 more to the organization than option one. So, you know, if you're a CFO and you're asking yourself, what would I do with $460,000 in free cash flow for additional investment? You know, would I choose that project, or would I choose the project that generated $170,000? They're both good projects, but which one would you choose? So I hope that kind of paints a picture of why taking a more complete view of the costs and savings of a project can have a material impact. Okay, so we'll just keep moving on here. I've mentioned a few times now the importance of aligning investment in the facility with the capital renewal needs of the facility. So, you know, this is especially true if you're talking about energy efficiency or, you know, maybe combined heat and power. And it may sound obvious and simple, but it's sometimes not done very well, if at all. So if you're dealing with a single facility, it could be as simple as cross-referencing the ECMs with the asset plan and looking for overlaps. And any director of facilities, you know, should have a pretty good handle on the, you know, the age and condition of the equipment in the building, and what, you know, what is up for replacement, and, you know, what is in his plan and his budget. So that's pretty simple. However, when you're dealing with a larger number of facilities or a portfolio, for example, you need to approach it more strategically. So one way to do it is to use multivariate analysis to prioritize investments based on greatest strategic impact. before you dive into engineering specific projects. So this is one example. So here we cross-reference building energy performance against facility conditions. So all the little blue dots are buildings, and the scale along the bottom is building energy performance, and the scale along the left is facility condition, or we call FCI. So, what this naturally does is highlight some priority buildings in the upper right-hand corner, priority 1, that have both poor energy performance and poor condition. So that's where you're going to focus first. These would be the starting point. Priority 2 buildings, these are buildings that have poor energy performance, but are in relatively good condition. So these buildings may have opportunities for low capital intensive measures because they're in reasonably good condition. But they may have some, let's say, low-hanging fruit opportunities like lighting controls or retro commissioning. These low-hanging fruit measures can generate additional cash flows beyond, the recovering their costs that you can then help to fund some of the capital renewal upgrades in priority 3 buildings. So approaching your portfolio more strategically, looking where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, and how you can use some buildings to support others is a more strategic way to go about it. So you can use this type of multivariate analysis for other needs as well. You can look at energy use intensity versus energy cost intensity. You can look at energy performance versus mission criticality. So if you've got a building that's highly mission critical, and you've got poor energy performance, you're probably going to want to invest in that facility and maybe invest in resilience of that facility. It's simply about looking for ways how your sustainability investment can impact other aspects of the organization. Let me know if there's any. You got a question?
Yeah, there's one question.
Yeah, question.
Yeah. So this was posted by Erin Crane, and Erin's with Economic Development Lethbridge. And obviously at EDL, she's working with businesses either that are looking to invest in the area or move to the area. So she said, thanks for touching on the timing aspect, Charles. This is when, so I've heard from businesses who feel that this work should only be done when changes are made, like i.e. new equipment expansions, that sort of thing.
Well, I guess that's probably, that attitude is probably stems from the fact that that's when the money will be available, right? So when we're renewing the assets, then we'll make them more efficient at that time. And certainly there is a case to be made that you don't want to invest in energy efficiency, in a facility that is going to be, let's say a 10-year project when that building is going to be decommissioned or sold in 3, 4, 5 years. However, I think that the financial analysis, looking at the return on investment, taking into consideration the types of equipment you're talking about that are going to be replaced down the road, there's no bad time to make a good investment, if that makes any sense. If it's a good investment now, and all things considered, it's a good investment. It's that simple. But you certainly want to make sure that you have all the information to make it a good investment. I hope that's helped.
Yeah, thanks for that, Charles. That's exactly what we needed to hear, and having this recording of this webinar will help a lot in it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Okay, and so there's no more. Oh, hi, Colette. I have a hard stop due to a meeting. This is Blair at 12:15. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate Charles and Jay's perspective and education. Well, thank you, Blair. And we also have another comment. Sorry, that was a direct message to me. Sorry about that, Blair. I didn't mean to call you out. Oh, my eyes are bad. Anyway, Mark Chidwick also gave you a nice thumbs up. He said, nice example, Charles, when you're giving an example of simple payback. You effectively showed the impact of looking at the complete picture. And I agree, you did a very good job.
I know Mark is one of the converted, so I don't need to preach to Mark. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this concept of integrating with asset management plans and capital cost avoidance, because it is very powerful, and goes right back to your kind of what we were just talking about, Aaron. is making sure that your project is competing on a level playing field with existing plans and budgets that the organization might have. So too many, as I said earlier on, too many of these projects are kind of managed off the side of somebody's desk. There's a sustainability coordinator that's leading it, etc. And it is not well integrated. So they then fail to recognize the opportunity to fund maintenance or capital renewal via an alternative funding stream, in this case, energy savings grants and incentives, for those needed capital upgrades or infrastructure upgrades. So sometimes they reject a project because it fails to meet an arbitrary payback threshold, only to turn around in 2 or 3 years and pay for some of that equipment out of their own pockets anyway. Because the equipment is due for replacement. And the tragic thing about all this is often when they do that, they just replace like for like, right? Because when they build the asset management plan, okay, that's what we put in. Our budget is a replacement cost for that unit. And so we had a, 500 MMBTU boiler. We're going to put in another 500 MMBTU boiler. No payback, no savings, no nothing. But it's the easy way to do it. So, this is where an energy efficiency project can shine, by making the facility more efficient, less pressure is putting on the heating and cooling system, possibly allowing for replacement with a smaller system, right? This is capital cost avoidance. And we recognize this capital cost avoidance by measuring the marginal cost of the two. So if our retrofit costs are going to eliminate a bunch of planned renewal costs, but it's going to have a 10% premium to do so, it's only the 10% premium that should be justified on the basis of energy savings, since the organization's already committed to spending the other 90. So this can be hard to get some people's heads wrapped around, but at least it's a way of showing the value and benefit of a project versus having it trying to compete unfairly against other capital investments. So in other words, if your project costs $100, but 70 is already allocated in the capital plan, we should evaluate the ROI on the remaining 30. Okay. Similarly, if the $100 investment is to be financed externally, the $70 becomes a capital cost avoided and can be redirected to other uses, because now all of that cost is being funded from energy savings. Your capital dollars are not being deployed for that purpose anymore. So these techniques, I'll give another example. These techniques were used to great effect in a hospital in British Columbia to evaluate the benefits of a major energy retrofit. So in this case, they applied a weighted criteria to each investment based on ROI, GHG reduction, and impact to patient care, comfort, and facility condition. So based on input from stakeholders across the organization, we came up with this weighted criteria matrix. We looked at the full life cycle costs and benefits of the proposed retrofits and identified capital cost avoidance opportunities where they had already planned to replace pieces of equipment that were not going to be necessary anymore, could be downsized, what have you. So the hospital was not only able to direct more work towards patient comfort, such as an improved HVAC sensing and control system, but they could also fund non-energy related upgrades, including the replacement of an end-of-life nurse call system in the hospital that had otherwise been off limits or pushed off year after year due to lack of capital. So the project grew probably by a factor of close to 3 from where it would have been if only simple payback and energy savings alone had been used. But once we kind of opened our eyes, made it a bit broader, trying to get the quickest payback was not a priority anymore. The ROI was important, but not the quickest payback. Now their eyes were open to seeing how could this project impact the organization, in terms of our core mission of helping patients. So, yeah, really good case example there. Here's another one, different project, but here's a really nice example of how an energy performance contract was used to provide a one-time investment of $5 million. Remember, an energy performance contract is a vendor finance deal. So this is $5 million of third-party financing, not the client's capital. And that capital injection into that facility resulted in approximately a 25% improvement in their facility condition index, and which translated into a 3-year extension of the building life. So, you know, I don't know how much this building was worth, but it was probably worth $100 million or close to it. So for the sake of a $5 million self-funded energy efficiency retrofit, they were able to extend the building life by 3 years. I think that's pretty powerful. So, you know, these energy efficiency projects can be strategic. They can really impact the strategic asset management decisions and plans of the organization. And they shouldn't just be looked at through, you know, narrow, short-sighted lens. So I'm going to take a break from my soapbox here for a minute. No more questions, I take it? Okay. So this last piece here is I want to talk about risk. Risk is an important aspect in these projects. And again, it's one of those things that is just not adequately assessed. So all investment involves risk, and sustainability is no different, right? All business cases and project models are built on data as well as assumptions, a lot of assumptions. These include assumptions about rising utility rates, inflation, energy savings percentages. And most projects today don't adequately capture the risk and range of probable outcomes. They simply take a snapshot in time and say, yep, based on all these assumptions, project looks like it's a good, you know, it's a good investment. Well, you know, what happens if some of these major assumptions fluctuate by 10 or 20%? Is it still a good investment? What's the probability of that happening? So, you know, if we're talking about on-site generation, we need to consider performance and reliability of the system. Okay, how much power can we rely on from these systems? When does it drop below the threshold needed to generate a return? And what's the probability of that happening? So, you know, we've seen solar projects, for example, where based on federal government and industry projections, you know, the solar, for that specific area, that solar system had a performance expectation of here. In reality, it was 30% below what they were expecting, despite having done everything right. So that's clearly a money loser, and that's, you know, that's not really providing much benefit to the organization when you have that kind of a swing. So also, last point is, don't forget too that risk can be to the upside. Risk isn't all about downside. So as you model the risks, you may actually find out that you're being conservative and there's a lot of upside potential. So let's talk about how we do it. So the first tool in managing risk is testing your assumptions and the sensitivity of your model to those assumptions. And this can be done by a scenario and or sensitivity analysis in Excel. Very easy to do for intermediate level Excel users. You know, at a basic level, let's put it that way. There are also software providers and organizations that also are experts in this as well, that you can work with. But it's very powerful when you can really see the range of probable outcomes. Also, insisting on industry best practices and transparency from vendors can help to mitigate risk somewhat, since these standards and certifications and things are prescriptive in nature, and that will help to reduce risk. So things like LEED or investor confidence project, things like that, you know, can help with that. Often measurement and verification is a component of these certifications, and that can be a valuable exercise. However, there are different methods of M&V, and they don't all add value. So it's important to know which method to use under which circumstance. Also, insurance and financing. So energy performance bonds and contracts are useful to transfer risk. In a performance bond, you essentially take insurance on the savings in the event they don't materialize. you can make a claim. Energy performance contracts are contractual agreements where a contractor provides a guarantee that a certain amount of savings will be generated annually by the project. And if they do not, then the ESCO will pay you the difference. This can be a very useful tool for larger projects, but they're still not risk-free. Finally, another strategy is to align your financing with your risk appetite based on the sensitivity analysis. So, for example, if your project has a very low risk, you may wish to finance that project. Since you're not overly concerned with the savings, right? You're pretty confident the savings are going to materialize. And so you're not too worried about the risk to repay the loan. And you don't want to tie up your own capital because you need uses for that capital. More important, core risks or core investments. On the other hand, a higher risk project may be unattractive to risk your capital dollars. So what you might want to do is try to find a compromise where you are willing to self-finance a small portion, put some of your capital at risk, and then finance the remaining 80% scenario, because you know that the likelihood of those cash flows being generated by the project is 90%, right? So there are creative ways to look at how you finance the project based on your risk tolerance. It's not black and white. So I won't spend much time on this slide, but basically sensitivity and scenario analysis are two types of tools. I already mentioned them. They are still subjective in that you have to establish limits, high and low limits to your assumptions and things like that. But particularly when you're talking about utility rates and things like that, there are experts like Jay who can help you understand what historical rates have looked like, and where the forward markets are moving and things like that. Scenario analysis is really about changing lots of variables at one time and saying, okay, what happens in this situation where we have, like, say, a really bad situation where everything is an inflationary, right? And then another situation where it's deflationary. Sensitivity analysis tests individual inputs one at a time. And I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Monte Carlo simulation, but it's a tool within Excel or other programs that can run thousands of scenarios at once and tell you what the likelihood of different outcomes is. That you can look at it and say, I am 90% sure that the project is going to return between this much and this much. Right. So these tools are readily available in Excel. And like I said before, a lot of these tools can be handled by intermediate level Excel users. But there's also software that's out there that can do this for you very effectively. And service providers, I should say. All right. If you're still with me, this is the last slide. So just a quick couple of words about risks specific to renewable or behind the fence projects. So I already mentioned, a performance risk and understanding what the range of potential outcomes of performance of the asset or the system might be. And, where your comfort level is in terms of taking the risk. So, I talked about solar PV potential versus actual, the same thing can be said for CHP, unscheduled shutdowns. CHPs go down from time to time, and they need regular maintenance. So, that has to be factored in and modeled in when you're assessing the performance of those systems. They also have an impact on the bill, because you have to understand that with solar, for example, your solar is going to be at its peak performance during the middle of the day. That's not when you're setting your peaks. So as much as it's going to reduce your overall consumption from the grid, your peak demand is not likely to change very much unless you have some funky storage setup, but it's not going to affect your peak demand. So your savings may not be as much as you think they're going to be. And your ratchet demand is going to continue to be where it was before. And in fact, because you've made your load profile more peaky now, the residual cost now, or so the cost of that residual power that you are pulling from the grid is probably going to go up on a unit basis because you have a more peaky profile now. So that, again, that needs to be taken into consideration. Finally,
Charles, if you don't mind, I'll just add a little bit there too.
Yeah.
So with solar, you know, it's maybe not so much that you won't be using the solar energy or it's not being produced at the peak time that you're needing it. It's also that, you know, there could be a day or two, maybe 3, where it's just cloudy and there just isn't enough solar production to shave off that peak during the middle of the day. And if it's not there, then anytime you're spent your 15 minutes at a new demand level, you're setting a new ratchet, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a big portion of the bill. So I said earlier on in the presentation how clients can get discouraged because they don't necessarily see the savings of and this can be one of the reasons why they don't see the savings, because they don't understand the relationship between on and off peak and demand ratchets and things like that. And then finally, PPAs, not all PPAs are created equal. So there are lots of different types of contract structures and agreements you can get into. You have to be careful, though, that sometimes the temptation to go into a PPA is because it's off balance sheet, there's no capital investment required and all of that. But if the PPA is not structured properly, it can result in the off-taker taking on a liability to their balance sheet. So that's just one of the issues. There are other issues as well, but they are still a very attractive tool for some people. So if you've made it,
can I jump in here really quick and ask a question? So around the benchmarking that you had showed earlier, right? I kind of was searching around through the portfolio manager, right? Is that something that a PPAA would take on for you? I know you had talked about not duplicating tasks. Is that one of those things?
I don't know if a PPA provider would. I doubt it. You know, that's really looking at your energy performance of your facilities and, you know, how they rank. Are they using X amount of energy per square foot compared to similar buildings and all of that? I'm not aware of PPA providers kind of getting that granular. They might look at your bills and things like that and tell you what they can charge you. And but I don't think they're going to look at your building performance. But I could be wrong, but I've never seen it. Yeah.
Thank you.
So if you made it this far, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I hope that you learned a few things today. And as I said, you know, it's kind of a mile wide and an inch deep. I didn't want to get too nitty gritty on some of the technical or financial stuff because, you know, you wouldn't have made it this far, most likely. So some of the key takeaways here is just, you know, that the value in taking a holistic approach to developing your strategy is really important. You know, don't take a short-sighted, narrow-minded view to these types of projects. It can be very powerful when they're done right. Using a structured process for making important decisions will ensure really good alignment to your organization goals and more buy-in from key stakeholders. So, you know, it's not as daunting as it might seem to do that. Investment grade financial analysis is really critical. It can unlock a lot of hidden potential and is certainly a hell of a lot better than simple payback. Finally, you know the risks, understand the risks, and develop a mitigation strategy and invest accordingly. There's nothing wrong with looking at the risks, and sometimes the risks are to the upside, and that's great. So, but you know the risks and invest the time and effort to do that. It's not that hard. Finally, I hope earlier on in the presentation that we've established that, you know, the time is now to take action. Regardless of how you feel about the environment, I'm certainly passionate about the environment and climate change, but I know there are a lot of skeptics. But, you know, just look at the facts. Utility rates are going up, funding is available, and, you know, there's really no reason not to be doing stuff like this. So that's it for me, Colette. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Yeah, I think I'll just add a couple of things. Yeah, the utility rates are going up, like you said, but also there's assets that need to be replaced, you know, so these projects are, if they're evaluated, like you say, with investment grade financial analysis, you could find potential to extend your operations, which is super valuable. And I think the most key takeaway at the end of the day is simple payback sucks. Yeah. Just kidding. But I think what I'll say is we'll unmute ourselves. And if you guys want to stick around, and if you just want to ask questions now that we're at the end of the presentation, we can keep the line open for 15, 20 minutes kind of thing, and then go from there. And I guess a big thank you also to Economic Development Lethbridge for hosting this. Thank you very much for putting all of your time and effort into helping us get organized and putting this on today. I appreciate Aaron, Trevor, and Mark very, very much.
Thank you, Trevor.
Trevor alluding to hashtag simple payback sucks. Words to live by. I love it.
Yeah, Charles, maybe we can get you to stop sharing your screen, and then we'll, if people need to take off, want to be respectful of your time. Thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate you being here. We will get this posted, and I'll get an email out to you with a link to the video if you'd like to rewatch it or sort of revisit some of the concepts. But certainly we've got time. We have our expert panel here, Jay, Charles, and Colette. Thanks so much for your time today in preparing this. But we're happy to answer questions and find out how we can perhaps help people that were part of it.
So Jason Mudry just asked, will the slide deck from today's presentation be available? I believe yes, we can share that.
Yep.
Steven says, oh.
Great, sorry Colette, it's Mark Chidwick here. With all of these, compelling stories here that you've got about, you just went through, what is preventing or holding the organizations back from actually engaging in these types of projects?
Want me to take that one? Mark, hi Mark, hope you're well. I wish I had that answer. Believe me, I really did. I really do. I think that there is still a perception that some of the pressures that we're seeing and this, what we perceive to be as, transformation, decarbonization, all that, I think there's still a perception among some people that this is temporary. And that, depending on our government and, who's in power at the time, this could go away in a few years. And I think that, and this is just me speaking, I think that any subsequent government may have their own different way of doing things. But this is a global macro trend. We're not turning around and going back to where we were 3 or 4 years ago anytime soon. I just don't see it. The massive capital investments are being decided right now because of these global mega trends, right? So if these people are making decisions on massive capital investments that are going to have 20, 30, 50-year life cycles, I think we're pretty safe to make our decisions on 10 or 15-year projects. You know what I'm saying? That's my 2 cents.
That would be disappointing if there's a ostrich head in the sand kind of attitude, saying, well, if I ignore this, maybe it'll go away. That would be disappointing.
But I think there's also an element of complexity to it all too. And that was sort of part of the point of this presentation today, is that there are a lot of different things to think about, and it's hard to know how to navigate all of this. And so hopefully some of these tools can help with that. Experts like Jay can help with understanding the utility markets and what's coming. Folks like yourself, Mark, can help clients navigate, some of these decisions through your tools and your software. So, that there are resources available. There are more than enough resources available for people to take advantage now.
I agree.
There's a question that came to my mind. So yeah, putting your head in the sand, but also, yeah, energy performance contracts, like, they've had a bad name in the past, right? So I don't know that that's just one financing option, but maybe that's another reason why people don't proceed with doing things. If they're looking down the energy performance contract road, they might hold back. But I think there's been a lot of changes, hasn't there, Charles, to how those things are managed now better than they were 20 years ago.
So for full disclosure, I spent many years in energy performance contracting. So I know quite a bit about that industry. And yes, you're right. There have been some bad projects, particularly in Alberta, because of our deregulated market. That poses a unique challenge to an energy performance contract where you have guaranteed savings, a contract for guaranteed savings, and then utility rates fluctuate dramatically. So that's been a challenge, but many of those challenges have been resolved. Also, measurement and verification, which is the process by which you look at the actual savings and reconcile whether or not the contractor owes you any money. That process was very lacking in transparency and standardization for a long time. And then several years ago, an international protocol was developed to direct that. So that's certainly improved as well. But these are complex long-term contracts and arrangements. And I think there is still truth that clients are not necessarily best served by relying solely on the contractor to guide them through the whole process and help them understand the risks and what their role is in managing their risks, right? They can't transfer all risks to the contractor. There's still some risks they have to own and manage. And I don't think all the contractors do the best job of educating their clients on that.
Yeah, that's fair. And then I think I'd like to just get you to think about, or maybe answer one thing here. So a lot of clients have different vendors coming to them, CHP vendors, solar vendors, whatever, different energy efficiency opportunities, that kind of thing. And I guess, it's almost like there's overwhelm. So if you could help, if there's one thing you could say that could help them know what is the number one thing that they should do when they have all these quotes coming in from all these different vendors promising them all these different results, what should they do? What's the first thing they should do?
Well, I think they should take a step back and think about what is their strategy. What are their goals and objectives? And what is it they want to achieve? And then go and start evaluating, like we talked about here today, evaluating options, evaluating technical solutions, but doing so through, a thoughtful process of establishing goals and objectives, not kind of reacting to the latest proposal that comes across the desk or, an offer that sounds too good to be true or whatever. So these can be very valuable programs when they're done strategically, but that means you need to take a step back and approach it as such.
Yeah, thanks.
I had a question. Thanks for the presentation, Charles and Jay. Excellent job today. The question about the macro trends. So we're having a major change from coal to natural gas in the Alberta grid. In terms of greening the grid, what do you see are the main ways the industry, the generators are now converting in a more significant way? Are you seeing the capital projects starting to get into fast track into the implementation stage at all in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a question for me, right, Stephen?
Sure.
Yeah. So capital is something very interesting. The capital is very hard to find in Alberta right now. And in fact, a lot of capital, a lot of the renewable projects, as you probably have seen, is not self-funded by Alberta companies. Case in point, Amazon building all those windmills in Alberta. They've hired Alberta companies to build those projects, but the capital is coming from outside, right? As you know, if you look at my earlier slides, the energy density in Alberta is much higher than anywhere else, right? Because we still have a lot of fossil fuel in our grid. To answer your question, as we're transitioning from coal to natural gas, and TransAlta, for example, decided, hey, we're not going to reinvest that money to convert we're just going to take the money and take it somewhere else. And I don't know where that somewhere else is right now, but the remaining coal plants are being converted to natural gas. So what's in the books is going to go forward as is. As far as utility scale generation is concerned, natural gas is right now the only solution we have right now as far as dispatchable power, and that's most efficient. And even if you take the emissions penalties that's been legislated by the federal government in the next 9 years, we're looking at a mid $60 levelized cost of generation, not factoring natural gas prices. If you run that and apply it, like Charles talked about sensitivity analysis, so you're bringing the levelized cost right up to $70. That's the reality we're faced right now. But TransAlta, ATCO, or Heartland Generation, Capital Power are still looking at that as potentially opportunities to make money, because they can. Why they can make money in that market despite the higher levelized cost of generation is because we're going into a market where our reserve margins are diminishing every year. So we're getting to be so tight in supply already, and storage solutions can't come fast enough in this market. In fact, I work in other markets too, in Asia Pacific and others and whatnot. From what I've seen, you can ramp up the battery in the storage, and it holds up for 2, 3, 4 hours like that. But then what? Then if you consume the battery, you still need to replenish the battery too, right? So Alberta has to deal with this going forward from a sustainability point of view. We need to look at all options: storage, gas, nuclear, a whole bunch of different things. And I believe, and I might be sticking my neck out here, I think customers like yourselves, Stephen, we also have to play a part in managing the price signal. Meaning, if there was an opportunity for the town of Canmore to get into the ancillary markets to curtail 100 kilowatts or 200 kilowatts on demand, that's going to help reduce the overall grid the strain on the grid, as well as prices as we go forward. So right now we don't have a market that allows for that. It's only available in the ancillary market if we're really strained. But I think as we go forward, there has to be a better signal to allow for people to make those investments. So I believe long term, I've seen this happen in other utilities in other countries where the utility companies are investing in client assets. So they might come to Stephen and say, hey, we'll put a little micro generator on your facility, and we are going to dispatch that micro generator because it's at the source of the load level versus somewhere 500 miles away. So that's the shift that might happen also as we go forward. That way you avoid transmission costs going forward. Don't know if that helped answer. That's so many points to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Thank you.
Okay. I get very emotional when you talk about power prices.
I think we all get emotional when we talk about power prices. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Are there other questions, comments, concerns, or feedback?
Oh, there's one here. Is there any move towards nuclear power in Alberta in the near future? Renewables rarely perform at more than 30 to 40% fleet capacity. I think, Jay, that's a question for you.
You know, didn't the current Alberta government, Saskatchewan, and I forget another, Ontario, signed like a memorandum of understanding to explore distributed nuclear generation, where we like package localized units in the market?
They did. I think they did. And they were going to put one in your backyard, I believe it was, Jay. No, I know what you mean, but I don't know the details, but I did hear that.
Yeah, it's still in the exploratory stage, guys. And again, COVID has really distracted everyone from all these different measures. But yes, the intent is to look at that because it's actually a very viable option. I call it my Iron Man arc option, right? Imagine just having one plugged into my house. I'll love it. But again, to make it viable, you really have to. In Alberta, nothing happens without the buying of the large generators. If you go into any AUC, Alberta Utilities Commission, proceeding or hearing, you'll see it's so polarized. You get the large industrials on one side, you get all the utilities on the other side, and it's always between the both of them. And people like us are always cut in the middle. We don't even know what they are talking about, let alone figure out what's going to happen. But really, the AUC has to reconcile between these two large groups. 60% of Alberta's consumptions or demand is driven by large industrials, and the utilities are on the other side. How do you make it all work? So anything we bring into the Alberta market has to work with these two different groups, including nuclear generation.
Good answer. Okay, if there's any more questions, and if not, I think we can probably get close to wrapping things up. And I just want to thank everyone again that's still here for sticking around and listening to this question and answer period. If you have any questions at all, you can feel free to get in touch with me. I put my email in the chat, but it is Colette, C-O-L-E-T-T-E, my last initial K, at eaiglobal.com, and I will direct you to the appropriate person or place if the question isn't something I can help address.
Thanks.